All right, class, welcome back to our discussion of E. Shelley Reid's 10 Ways to Think About Writing, Section 1, 1,000 Rules and 3 Principles. And she starts off her entire essay with a really excellent sentence about writing. Writing is hard. And I find that just to be true a lot of the times. It can just be difficult. Even if you know what you're doing, even if you know how to do it, it can be a painful or frustrating or difficult process. So one of the things that this class is about is not just teaching you these principles of writing, not just teaching you these like, oh, how do I write a paper or what goes into a paragraph or all that, but also to have more confidence in yourself. A lot of people come into 1010 maybe not believing in themselves or believing that they're a good writer, and that by the end of this semester, hopefully you will feel that you are a much stronger writer, or even if you don't feel that you are, you know that you can be. It's just a difficult task, and even people who are well studied in it, like all your professors with their master's degrees and PhDs, or even people who do it professionally, like E. Shelley Reid's going to note here herself, they find it to be difficult. An analogy that I like to use is one of three-point shots in basketball, where the physics of a three-point shot, it's a difficult shot, especially if you're a beginner and you get out there on a basketball court and you just start trying to throw three-point shots. You're going to miss most, if not all of them. The professionals, on the other hand, with thousands of hours of practice and training, they can consistently hit those three-point shots and they make it look easy. However, the physics of the situation is the same for them. It's still a hard shot. They just trained and got good at it. So if you see somebody who's really good at writing, it's still a difficult task. It might just be the case that that person is really trained in it. So, sometimes I get students who are really intimidated by the first essay in this class, and I myself can sit down and write it out in probably 30 minutes, but I also have decades of experience in this kind of thing at this point. If you don't, it's normal for writing to feel hard, and even if you do, it's normal for writing to feel hard. So if writing feels difficult to you, if you feel like this is frustrating, that's a perfectly normal spot to be in. It does not say anything about your skill level or ability. Writing is hard. It might always be for you, and that is fine and okay and normal. So rant aside, she makes a good point with this opening thing. Writing is hard. But one of the things that she says makes writing harder for a lot of students is that when we sit down to write, we try to follow too many rules for writing. So that means all the rules for writing you've ever been told throughout your educational career up to this point. Things like always have a thesis statement, no one-sentence paragraphs. And one of the things I do enjoy asking students in person, when I have the ability to be in person because I'm not sick, is, how many sentences should a paragraph be? You can't have one-sentence paragraph, so how many sentences should they be? And a lot of times I'll get like 4 to 6, 7 to 10, 5 to 8, the very common answers, but the answer is ultimately as many sentences as it needs to. You probably have heard this rule, no one-sentence paragraphs. Or don't start a sentence with and or but. Well, it's probably a rule you've heard, but you also absolutely can do that if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Or don't use I. Your first essay is a story about yourself. You should absolutely be using first-person pronouns. Back onto the topic of no one-sentence paragraphs, let's scroll back to section number 8 down here that we looked at before. Reid is making one of her critical points down here in the middle of this section, where she says, at the start of this paragraph, the simplest thing you can do to get your money's worth and your time's worth from your books and other reading material is this, you can write on them, period. Next paragraph. That's a one-sentence paragraph. It works perfectly fine. The reason it works perfectly fine is that Reid knows exactly what she's doing, who she's writing to, and why she's going to use a one-sentence paragraph here. She knows she's writing to freshman college students who might be in their first college writing class ever. So, in addition to that, she's kept these sections pretty brief, 2 pages-ish around, and she knows that if she really wants you to pick up the point she's trying to make on a reading that you might not want to do because you've been assigned it, the best way for her to do that is to make that point stand out. And a great way to make that point stand out, one sentence paragraph. It makes it very hard to miss ultimately what her point is. So no one sentence paragraphs. Can you have a one sentence paragraph? You absolutely can. She's got actually a couple up here too. But I will say in academic writing, we do tend to lean toward longer paragraphs, 11 sentences or more. And the reason I say that is we really want to be able to give our reader clear, specific details. We want that specificity. We want a very good level of detail. And that usually means continuously being more specific until we have, ultimately, we need all the sentences in order to tell our reader what we want to communicate. So don't be surprised if once we, cover what is the kind of level of detail we should be going into, you find that that lends itself toward longer paragraphs. But if you need to make a point and you need to make it stand out, people who told you no one sentence paragraphs, you can absolutely do that. But know why you're doing it before you do it. Same with not starting a sentence before and or but. I will say some things are going to be true for academic writing in general. Like always have a thesis. It's like, all right, if you're going to write a paper for a class, yes, have a thesis. That is a genre convention of academic writing. Academic readers expect thesis statements. Kind of like how it's a genre convention of romance novels that there be a happily ever after, or at least a happy for now. Or it's a genre convention of horror novels that their author try and scare the reader. It's a genre convention of academic writing for papers in future classes that you, in fact, have a thesis statement. So some of these rules are rules in certain contexts, but not in others. And so remembering all of this stuff and then figuring out what applies to your specific context versus doesn't can be very frustrating for a writer. And Reid is going to say that makes writing feel like a chore. It doesn't make it feel like this process. It makes it feel like this thing that is just going to be frustrating to do. And she's got a solution for this. She says, all those rules, forget about them. Don't remember them. Don't worry about them at all. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that because certain things like I before E except after C, like that's a spelling rule, and this is a academic genre rule, and there's other things, like it's a whole mishmash of like both higher order and lower order rules here. Absolutely remember your grammar rules. That just helps your communication be more clear. But for everything else, do these three things, and then you will be exactly where you need to be. So, what are these three things? Well, one, these three principles. Principle one, write about what you know about, are curious about, are passionate about, or what you can find a way to be curious about or interested in. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I certainly have, where if I'm really excited about something, like I found a new game or a new TV show, or I saw a great movie, or whatever the case is, and I go talk to my friends, I can just ramble for hours about how great that thing was. So if I'm passionate about something, I could talk about it a lot. And that also translates over to writing. If you're really interested in something, you can absolutely, it will just be easier to write about because it's something you think is cool, and you've got all these thoughts in your head about how cool it is, and you want to get them out so you can show other people how cool that thing is. Having passion about something, having curiosity about something, it makes writing easier 100%, which is why, we give you a lot of leeway in the different kinds of topics you could pick in your essays across this class. First essay, you're telling me a story about yourself and about something that you are literate in. Go nuts, pick something that you really like to do. Tell me about, one of your hobbies or something like that. You are literate in your hobbies. It's got a language unto itself. There are people who are really into sports and they can communicate with each other in ways that I don't understand. But if you're really passionate about that, yeah, that'll make it easier to do. Now, one of the reasons I only have the third rule principle here highlighted, well, there's a couple different reasons. But for one, it's because I don't think rule number one, to start off with, is always true or able to be true. I'll say it that way. Is it easier to write about something if you're curious about it or passionate about it? Or you could find a way to be curious about it or interested in? 100% yes. Are you going to end up in some class you're taking for your core requirements where you're required to write a paper and you're not really interested in anything in that class and you got to write the paper anyway and you want to do well because you want to get a good grade? Or you're assigned to write a memo or a client email for work and it's just something you've got to write and you just got to do it. And it's not a question of passion. It's not a question about curiosity. It's a question about work needs to get done one way or another. It's like, yeah, that to me seems like that's true. You're not always going to be able to be curious or passionate about something. That doesn't mean that you can't be a really good writer on top of that. Writing is hard. It can feel like work. You can't approach it that way. And you can produce good writing products whether or not you enjoy or are interested in the topic at hand. Ultimately, if you're a really good writer, you should be able to do that. So rule number 1 for me is like, this is great if it's true, and we should want it to be true every time. We should try and make it true every time, but it might not always be the case that you can do this. So for me, this is one of those things where I've mentioned this before looking at other readings. The Section 8 one, I don't always agree with Reed on a lot of her points, and I'll point out to you, like I am now, where that is. But I also think that she's got a lot of very valuable things to say, which we're building up to that. 2, her second rule, show, don't just tell. Now, if you know what that means, then congratulations, you've read ahead to Section 2. But also, telling writing also has its place. Show, don't tell is a great aphorism for like creative writing and things like that. But if you go get a tech writing job and you are writing, technical manuals for a car, or you're writing an instruction manual for somebody's new cell phone or something like that, telling writing has its place. And that's just some things out there are telling writing, and those things do need to be written by writers. And I don't know what all your majors are or what you're going to end up doing. But just keep that in mind is, 1, people who have English degrees disagree on what this phrase means all the time or how important it is. So I'm sure you will have people telling me that, no, when you're writing instruction manuals, you're really doing showing. It's like, or things like that. But just being direct and to the point, sometimes telling your audience is the right thing to do. It really just depends on who you're writing to and why you're writing to them. Which brings me to point number 3. Adapt to the audience and purpose you're writing for, which is really the ultimate crux of all of these. This is the one that I think is 100% true. Know who you're writing to, know why you're writing to them, and you are going to have a better chance or a better opportunity at having a more successful writing project, regardless of what that project is. Sometimes that means your audience and your purpose means you're going to do a little bit of telling, because that's what your audience wants. Sometimes it means you're not going to do any telling at all, because that's what the audience expects. Sometimes it means you are your only audience, and if you are writing in your diary or journal at the end of the day, and your purpose is to just vent and get things out of your head, knowing that you are the only person in your audience, you can say things that maybe you wouldn't tell a friend if you were venting to them, or a coworker if you were venting to them. If you sit down and take nothing else from this class, rule number 3 from this reading, always think about your audience. Who am I writing to? Always think about your purpose. Why am I writing to them? This is a great thing to take. If nothing else, this is an excellent rule to carry with you. Now, the second reason that I've got this highlighted and not the other 2 is that I think Reed also feels like this is really the important one here. And the reason I say that is if we go down into this paragraph, she's going to say that these principles all stack toward this. We should write about what we know about, principle 1, so that we can show, not tell, principle 2, in order to adapt to our audience's needs and accomplish our goals, principle 3. So even for her, rule number 1, that helps you do rule number 2. Rule number 2, That helps you do rule number 3. It all leads to rule number 3 here. So for her, it leads to rule number 3. For me, it leads to rule number 3. We take different paths to get there, but that is exactly where we both end up, is think about who you're writing to, think about why you're writing to them, and that ultimately is going to make you a better writer over time. Let me skim the rest of this because we're over 15 minutes already. So keep that in mind. These terms are going to come up again and again throughout the course of the class. Who you're writing to, why you're writing to them, audience and purpose. These are incredibly important writing concepts. And then I will see you all in the next video, which I believe for this class is we are going to discuss the writing process. I will see you then.